The first sign that my marriage was in trouble wasn't some dramatic revelation. No, it was the missing coffee scoop. Every morning for the past 5 years, I had scooped exactly 2 heaping tablespoons of coffee into the machine, hit the button, and waited for the only thing in my life that made sense at 6 a.m. But one morning, the scoop was gone. Just vanished. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd left it in the dishwasher? Nope. The drawer where it always went? Empty. I checked the trash. Nothing. Betty, have you seen the coffee scoop? I asked as she walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel with wet hair, like she had just stepped out of a shampoo commercial that catered specifically to people who wanted to make their husbands feel like extras in their own home. She barely glanced at me. Nope, she said, reaching for a yogurt. That was it. No curiosity, no helping me look. Just nope. That was the moment I knew something was off. Not because of the coffee scoop itself, I mean. I could have used a spoon like a normal person, but because Betty had developed this fascinating ability to make herself completely unavailable for anything that involved me. She had once torn apart the entire kitchen looking for her favorite wine opener, calling me at work in a panic because she couldn't find it. But now? Nothing. Just nope. I let it slide. Because that's what you do when you're married. You let things slide. Then, things started disappearing in small, almost laughable ways. A pair of my socks. The good scissors. My gym bag. The screwdriver I always kept in the drawer near the fridge. None of it seemed connected until one day. I found my missing screwdriver in Betty's car. I wasn't snooping. I had gone out to grab a jacket I had left in the back seat. But there it was, sitting in the passenger seat like it had taken itself on a joyride. Honey, I called into the house. Betty was in the living room, painting her nails a shade of red that I was pretty sure she had never worn in all the time I'd known her. Yeah. Why is my screwdriver in your car? She didn't even look up. Oh, I borrowed it. For what? Something at work. I stared at her. Something at work? Yep. I had worked in an office before, and I was pretty sure there were no daily emergencies that required a screwdriver. You're fixing printers now? I asked. She sighed, blowing on her nails like my question had exhausted her. Matthew, does it really matter? No, I said slowly. Not really. Except it did. Because the next thing to go missing wasn't an object. It was Betty herself. She started coming home later and later. And not stuck in traffic, late, but the kind of late where she had to invent elaborate stories to explain it. Oh, there was a client dinner. Oh, Megan's boyfriend broke up with her, and we had to go out for drinks. Oh, you know how it is. Actually, I didn't. I had no idea how it was. Because I had never seen Megan cry, let alone require emergency cocktails 3 nights a week. Then, one Friday night, I decided to do something radical. I made dinner. I even lit a candle, which is about as romantic as I get without being legally required to. Betty was supposed to be home by 7. By 8, I had eaten half of her meal. By 9, I had finished both plates. By 10, I had stacked the dishes in the sink and was considering what kind of documentary would make me feel smarter while I fell asleep on the couch. At 10:30, she walked in. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched as she kicked off her shoes, her hair slightly messier than when she left that morning. Oh, she said, noticing the table. You made dinner. Yeah, I said. It's in your stomach. Hope it was good. She forced a smile. Sorry, it was just a long night, I know. There was a moment where she hesitated. Just the briefest pause. Like her brain had to catch up to the excuse she hadn't finished forming yet. And that was the moment I knew. Not because of the screwdriver. Not because of the missing socks. Not even because of the absurd number of client dinners she had suddenly started attending. It was because she hesitated. A person who tells the truth doesn't hesitate. They just say it. But a person who lies? They need a second. Just one. To make sure the story they're about to tell makes sense. I didn't say anything else that night. But I had made up my mind. I was going to find out exactly what Betty had been up to. And for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't the one losing something. I was about to gain the truth. Betty was a woman of routine. Up at 6:45. Shower by 7. Breakfast at 7:20 if she wasn't too busy checking emails on her phone, which was always positioned at an angle that conveniently blocked my view. Out the door by 8. Back home by 6, at least in the old days, before the sudden boom in client dinners, emergency girl nights, and urgent personal errands that, for some reason, couldn't be done during daylight hours like they were for every other normal person on Earth. This particular morning, though, she was running late. She came downstairs at 8:15, looking like she had just lost a battle with her closet. Hair still damp, half her blouse unbuttoned, muttering under her breath like the universe had personally sabotaged her morning. "Late night?" I asked, sipping my coffee. She barely acknowledged me. "Overslept." Interesting. Betty never overslept. Not once in 5 years. She could have a fever, a power outage, or an air horn going off next to her head, and she would still be up at the same time, ready to conquer the day with the efficiency of a military operation. First time for everything, huh? I leaned back in my chair. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her bag and started shoving things into it like she was packing to flee the country. "What's the rush?" I asked, watching as she nearly decapitated a banana trying to peel it. She finally looked up, exasperated. "What is with the third degree, Matthew? I'm running late." "It happens. Not to you." She hesitated. Just for a second. The same way she had the night before. Then she rolled her eyes, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door without another word. I waited until I heard her car leave before I stood up. It was time to get some answers. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't some genius mastermind who could hack into her phone or install tracking software. But I was observant. And I knew one thing for sure. If someone is lying to you, they leave breadcrumbs. Tiny little pieces of evidence that, by themselves, mean nothing. But put together, they tell a story. And my first breadcrumb was sitting right there on the kitchen counter. Betty's work badge. She never went anywhere without it. It was practically glued to her. If she was leaving the house in a rush, fine. But forgetting something as basic as the thing that lets her into her own office? That was out of character. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Then, on a whim, I checked her schedule. Betty was very particular about her calendar. Everything was written down in a neat little planner. If she had a meeting, a coffee date, even a random trip to the dry cleaners, it was in there. But today? Today was blank. No meetings. No appointments. No scheduled anything. She had left the house like she was fleeing a crime scene, but according to her own planner, she had nowhere to be. That was breadcrumb number 2. I sat back down, tapping my fingers on the table. There were 2 possibilities here. Either Betty had suddenly developed a deep passion for unplanned, mysterious outings, or she was lying about where she was going. And the old Betty? The Betty I married? She didn't do unplanned. I grabbed my keys. There was only one way to find out. I wasn't about to do anything ridiculous, like follow her around town like some guy in a bad TV show. But I did have something better, knowledge of my own wife's habits. For 5 years, Betty had taken the same route to work. Same streets, same stoplights, same little turns to avoid the bad intersections. If she really was just running late, she would have taken that route. So I took a different one. I went straight to the only place that made sense. Her office. It was easy enough to park across the street and just watch. I wasn't trying to be subtle. I was just curious. 10 minutes passed. 15. 30. Betty never showed up. Breadcrumb number 3. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. It wasn't like I had caught her doing anything. Maybe she had an appointment she forgot to write down. Maybe she was running errands. But deep down, I knew better. And it turns out, I didn't have to wait long for my next clue. Because at exactly 11:42 a.m., I got a text from Betty. "Hey, work is crazy today. Might be late again. Don't wait up for dinner." I stared at the message. Work. The place she hadn't gone to. I couldn't help but smile. Not because I was happy, but because it was almost impressive. Betty wasn't just lying. She was committed to it. But the thing about lying is that once you start, it's hard to stop. And people always slip up eventually. I just had to be patient. And when she finally made that mistake, I'd be waiting. Betty came home that night at 10:27 p.m., looking as exhausted as someone who had just pulled a double shift at a job they didn't actually go to. She dropped her purse on the counter, stretched her neck like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and let out a sigh that was just dramatic enough to be suspicious. "Crazy day," she muttered, rubbing her temples. I sat on the couch, watching her with mild curiosity. "Oh yeah? What happened?" She hesitated. Not for long, just half a second. The kind of pause that you wouldn't catch unless you were specifically looking for it, which I was. "Meetings. Back to back. You know how it is." I nodded slowly. "Sure. Nonstop meetings. The ones you have at work. That you definitely went to." She narrowed her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You just look really tired for someone who forgot her work badge at home." Her expression flickered. Another tiny slip. She recovered quickly, But it was too late. I had already seen it. I had a temporary one printed, she said, her voice just a little too even. It's not a big deal, Matthew. Right. Not a big deal. Just like the fact that you never actually went to your office today. Now, that got a reaction. A full body freeze, like someone had just hit the pause button on her. She didn't even blink. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before leaning forward. I was in the area. Figured I'd swing by. Thought maybe we could grab lunch. But you weren't there. She swallowed. Yeah. Her jaw tightened. I had an off-site meeting. All day? Yes. I tilted my head. Where? Downtown, she said immediately. Too immediately. Damn, I said. That's crazy, because I was downtown, too. Must have just missed you. There it was again. That hesitation. It was starting to happen more frequently now, like cracks forming in a dam. She let out a sharp breath. Why are you interrogating me? I raised an eyebrow. Interrogating? Betty, I'm just asking where you were. Unless that's a problem for some reason? Her hands clenched at her sides. I don't have to tell you my every move, Matthew. Absolutely, I agreed. Just like I don't have to believe every word you say. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to decide whether to double down on the lie or switch tactics. She chose deflection. This is ridiculous, she said, grabbing her purse again. I'm going to take a shower. Classic move. By some time, get some space, maybe come up with a better story. I let her go without another word, listening as she stomped up the stairs. I stayed on the couch, drumming my fingers on my knee. Betty had just confirmed what I already knew. She was lying. The only thing left was figuring out why. And I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait long for the answer. Betty's lies had officially reached the level of a bad improv show, lots of dramatic pauses, shaky delivery, and a plot that made no sense. I could have just called her out right then and there, but where's the fun in that? No. If she was going to insult my intelligence with these kindergarten-level deceptions, I was going to make it interesting. The first step was gathering more evidence, because while I knew she was lying, I needed something solid. Not to confront her. No, that would be too predictable. I needed leverage. A good revenge plan requires patience, precision, and just the right amount of chaos. So, I did what any husband with a sudden interest in his wife's mysterious behavior would do. I became a very casual, extremely polite stalker. The next morning, I kissed Betty goodbye like I wasn't secretly planning to track her movements like an overqualified FBI agent. Have a good day at your definitely real job, I said, smiling. She gave me a weird look but nodded. Thanks. I watched her pull out of the driveway. Then, I got in my car and took a different route. She always turned right at the intersection if she was going to work. That morning, she turned left. Interesting. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, which, honestly, wasn't hard. Betty wasn't exactly a trained operative. Her head was practically glued to her phone at stoplights, probably texting about how crazy work was. After 20 minutes, she pulled into a suburban street. Not an office building. Not a coffee shop. Just some random neighborhood. I slowed down, watching as she parked in front of a house. And then, the final nail in the coffin, she got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and let herself in. No knocking. No hesitation. Like she had done it 100 times before. I didn't need to see anything else. I could have stormed in right then, made a scene, demanded answers. But that would have been too easy. Betty wasn't just going to get caught. She was going to get exposed in a way she'd never see coming. And I already knew exactly how. Step 1. Information warfare. I spent the next few days acting completely normal. No suspicious behavior, no accusations. Just a loving husband, going about his day. Meanwhile, I started doing a little research. First, I found out who owned the house. A quick search led me to a name, Darren Maxwell. Some guy in his early 40s. Not married. Worked in sales. Just your average, run-of-the-mill suburban dude. Step 2. Social engineering. I made a fake Facebook profile. Nothing too complicated, just a basic account with enough details to look real. Then, I sent Darren a friend request. He didn't accept right away, but that was fine. I wasn't in a rush. Step 3. Psychological warfare. The real fun began when I started planting seeds. The next few nights, I casually mentioned things to Betty. Nothing too obvious, just little comments. Hey, you ever think about getting a security camera for the house? So many weirdos around these days. Man, my coworker found out his wife was cheating in the dumbest way. Left her email open on his laptop. Can you imagine? The neighbor's husband just vanished overnight. You think she was up to something? Every time, Betty barely reacted. Just a quick nod, a forced chuckle, a shift in her seat. But I could tell it was getting to her. Then, the real masterpiece. I left my laptop open on purpose one evening, with a Google search conveniently displayed. How to recover deleted text messages iPhone. I made sure she saw it. And sure enough, the next morning, she was acting off. Checking her phone more than usual. Fidgety. Like someone who suddenly realized they might have left behind evidence of a crime. Perfect. Then, the final step, the setup. Darren finally accepted my fake friend request. I waited a day, then casually sent him a message. Hey, man. Just a heads up, your car was parked outside my house the other day. My wife said she didn't know who you were, but I figured I'd check in. Thought maybe it was a mix-up. I didn't accuse him of anything. Just planted the idea that someone was watching. His response? Oh, sorry, I think you have the wrong person. Yeah, sure, Darren. Totally a coincidence. Then, I sent him another message. No worries, man. Just making sure. Weird thing is, my neighbor has a security camera, and I'm pretty sure it caught something. If you ever need to clear anything up, let me know. The dude left me on read. And just like that, the real panic began. By that evening, Betty was in full meltdown mode. Checking her phone every 5 minutes, pacing the kitchen, glancing at me like she thought I had secretly installed a lie detector under the table. I just sat there, sipping my coffee. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, she said, forcing a smile. Just tired. I nodded. Work must be exhausting. She flinched. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. But I was going to let her sweat for a little longer. Because sometimes, revenge is best served slow. The next morning, Betty was up before me, which almost never happened. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at the table, gripping her coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing into a nervous heap on the floor. I took a moment to enjoy the sight. It was rare to see her like this, unprepared, off balance. Usually, Betty was all about control. The perfect planner. Always 5 steps ahead, always in charge of the situation. But now? Now she looked like someone who had been thrown into an exam for a class she didn't even know she was taking. You're up early, I said, pouring myself a cup. She forced a tight-lipped smile. Couldn't sleep. Must be all those exhausting meetings. She flinched. And just like that, I knew she was about to break. Not in the way I wanted, of course. No, Betty wasn't going to suddenly confess. That would be too honest, and honesty was not her strong suit. What she would do, however, was try to get ahead of whatever disaster she thought was coming. And there was one tool Betty had always relied on when things got messy: pity. Sure enough, she sighed deeply, setting down her mug like it was suddenly too heavy to hold. Matthew, I feel like. I don't know. Like things have been weird between us lately. I took a sip of coffee. Weird how? She hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was about to say something so emotional, so heartbreaking, that I wouldn't be able to resist pulling her into my arms and telling her everything would be okay. I've been feeling really lost, she murmured. Like, in my life, in myself. It's like I don't even know who I am anymore. Ah, there it was. I nodded slowly. That's tough. Her eyes flickered with something. Hope? Surprise? She probably expected me to start comforting her, to play right into whatever game she was about to spin. But I wasn't in the mood to play. She sighed again, shaking her head. I think work has been draining me more than I realized. I come home, and I feel like I can't even be present. I feel so disconnected from everything. That must be hard, I said, nodding. Especially since you weren't even at work yesterday. Her face froze for half a second before she forced a smile. I told you, I had an off-site meeting. Right? I said. Downtown. Crazy coincidence how I was there too, and yet somehow, I never saw you. She pressed her lips together. You're keeping track of where I go now? Not at all, I said easily. Just thought it was strange. Her hands clenched slightly, but she recovered quickly. Betty was good at this, twisting things, dodging, flipping the conversation, so I was the unreasonable one. And right on cue, she sighed dramatically and dropped her head into her hands. Matthew, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I feel like you don't trust me. I tilted my head. Huh. I wonder why that is. Her head snapped up. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, sipping my coffee. Just thinking out loud. She stared at me, searching for something in my face, some crack in my expression that would tell her how much I actually knew. But I had been married to Betty for 5 years. I knew how this worked. If I showed even an inch of doubt, she would turn it into a mile-long sob story about how hard things had been for her lately, how lonely she felt, how she just needed support and understanding and a husband who believed in her. And that wasn't happening. Matthew, she said, her voice softer now. I don't know what's going on with you, but I feel like we're... The doorbell rang. She jumped so hard she almost knocked over her coffee. And that was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't rush to answer the door. I took my time, strolling past her as she sat there, stiff as a statue. I could feel her eyes on me, her breath caught in her throat, waiting, praying that it wasn't who she thought it was. I opened the door. Hey, man. Darren. Standing on my porch, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. I smiled. Darren. Good to see you. His eyes darted past me, straight to Betty, who was now standing in the kitchen doorway, pale as a ghost. He muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought maybe we should, talk. I nodded. Yeah, absolutely. Betty, Darren thinks we should talk. What do you think? Betty swallowed. Matthew. Oh, don't mind me, I said, stepping back. Come on in, Darren. Let's all talk like adults. Darren hesitated, probably weighing whether or not walking into my house was a death trap, which was fair. But I wasn't interested in hurting him. I just wanted to watch him squirm. Slowly, he stepped inside. Betty looked like she was about to be physically ill. And I was having the time of my life. Darren stepped into my house like a man who had just realized he walked into an active minefield. His shoulders were stiff, his hands jammed into his pockets, and his eyes flicked between me and Betty like he was trying to decide which one of us was more likely to ruin his day. Spoiler alert, it was me. Betty, for her part, looked like she wanted to jump out the nearest window. Matthew, I held up a hand. Betty, come on. Darren and I were just about to have a friendly chat. Darren let out a nervous chuckle. Yeah, so listen, man, this is all kind of a misunderstanding? I finished for him, nodding. Yeah, that makes sense. Because it would be really weird if my wife was sneaking around with some guy and then he showed up at my house looking guilty. That'd be crazy, right? Darren laughed again, even more awkwardly this time. Right. Look, I gestured toward the couch. Have a seat, Darren. He hesitated. I gestured again. Come on, you came all this way. He glanced at Betty, maybe hoping she'd save him, but she just stood there, gripping the back of a chair like she was trying to keep herself from collapsing. I sat down in the chair across from him, giving him my best I have all the time in the world expression. So, Darren, let's talk. He rubbed his hands together. Look, man, I didn't come here to start anything. Oh, no worries, I said cheerfully. I already started it. You're just here for the fun part. Betty finally snapped out of her frozen state. Matthew, stop it. Stop what? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Talking? I thought we were all about communication in this house. She shot me a desperate look, her eyes pleading. Please, let's go upstairs and talk. Talk about what? I asked innocently. Your busy work schedule? Your deep personal struggles. Betty's face turned red. Darren shifted uncomfortably. You know what? Actually, Betty, I said, leaning back. Why don't you talk? Since you clearly have so much to say. She swallowed hard. Matthew, you what? I asked. You never meant to hurt me? You were confused? It just happened. Darren looked like he wanted to sink into the couch and disappear. Man, this is awkward, I said, shaking my head. I mean, what do we even do here? Do we do the whole dramatic fight thing? Do you beg me to stay? Does Darren give some noble speech about how he didn't mean for this to happen? Betty's hands clenched. Matthew, stop acting like this is some joke. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, no, it's hilarious. You know why? Because I knew. I knew weeks ago. And I let you dig this hole. She blinked. You, what? I smiled. You really think I just started noticing things? Betty, come on. Give me some credit. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned back to Darren. So, tell me, Darren, what's the plan here? You gonna take her in? Start your cute little life together? Darren's face drained of color. Betty spun toward him. Darren, what are you doing here? Why would you come here? Oh, great question, I said. Darren, why did you come here? He looked wildly between us, then sighed, rubbing his face. Look, Betty, I don't. This is all. Maybe we should slow down. Betty's eyes widened. Slow down. He shifted uncomfortably. I mean, I just think maybe we rushed into this. Maybe we need to take a step back into... Betty's expression turned murderous. You said you wanted this. I whistled. Well, not exactly the romantic moment you were hoping for, huh? She spun back to me. Matthew, stop enjoying this. I smiled. Oh, Betty, you have no idea how much I'm enjoying this. Darren stood up suddenly. I think I should go. Come on, Darren, I said. You just got here. Stay. Talk. Be a man. But he was already walking toward the door. Betty rushed after him. Darren, wait. He didn't wait. He walked right out the door, leaving Betty standing there like someone who just realized they backed the wrong horse. I took a deep breath, stretching my arms. Well, that was satisfying. Betty turned back to me, her whole face crumbling. Matthew, please. I sighed, standing up. Nope. Tears filled her eyes. Please. I made a mistake. I don't know why I did this. I was lost. You were selfish, I said. You were careless. You thought you'd get away with it. And now you're sorry because it blew up in your face. Her hands trembled. I love you. I snorted. Sure you do. I do. She stepped toward me, but I held up a hand. You love this, I said, gesturing between us. You love being married. You love stability. You love not dealing with the consequences of your actions. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Please. Just give me a chance to fix this. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I grabbed my jacket off the chair. Where are you going? She asked, her voice shaking. I shrugged. Don't know. Don't care. Matthew. I opened the door. You know what's funny, Betty? I really did love you. And you ruined that. So, congrats. Then I walked out. And I didn't look back. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel